The Imperium has fought 3 wars over Armageddon, trillions of lives spent, entire Space Marine chapters ground down to fragments, reformed, and ground down again. A Commissar so old and so thoroughly rebuilt from Ork trophies that the bell of lost souls on Terra rang for him. And then he came back and shot a planetary governor in the head for suggesting evacuation. After all of it, the largest military organization in human history still hasn't correctly identified what it is dealing with. The Orks aren't invading Armageddon, they're making a pilgrimage. Every WAAAGH that has crashed into that planet is, in Ork theological terms, a devotional act. Armageddon is the Ork Holy Land. Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka, whose official lore title, printed in codex supplements and confirmed across multiple sources, is Prophet of the WAAAGH, isn't a warlord with territorial ambitions. He is a prophet with a divine mandate and a direct line to his gods. Sebastian Yarrick, the Hero of Hades Hive, the old man who carries an Ork warboss's arm where his own used to be and a glance-killing laser where his left eye used to be, has been canonized by an alien religion without his knowledge or consent. The specific, grinding, 10,000-year tragedy is that the Imperium has been doing everything right militarily. Every fortification, every heroic last stand, every monitoring station placed in the outer system with a hero's name on it, all of it's the correct military response to a military problem. And every single correct response is another verse of a hymn the Orks hear as an invitation. Somewhere in the void above Armageddon, a red light burns. A bionic laser implant installed in the socket of a human Commissar who heard the Orks say he could kill with a glance and decided to make that literally true. The Orks call him Old Baal Eye. They say that name the way pilgrims name a cathedral, with recognition and with the intention of return. To understand why a planet becomes a cathedral, you need to understand how Orks practice faith. Gork and Mork aren't metaphors. They exist in the warp as genuine entities, formed from and sustained by the collective psychic output of every Ork in the galaxy. Gork is brutal but cunning. Mork is cunning but brutal. This distinction, which sounds trivial from the outside, is internally precise and theologically significant. Gork hits you harder when you are looking. Mork hits you harder when you aren't. They are powered by the same mechanism that powers the Chaos Gods, belief made manifest as psychic energy in the immaterium. The difference is what they feed on. The Chaos Gods require fear, ambition, excess, and despair. Gork and Mork require fighting. They are sustained by the most prevalent behavior of the most numerically dominant sapient species in the galaxy, a species that has been fighting continuously for millions of years and does essentially nothing else. Their worshippers are everywhere. Their church is any surface where blood has been spilled. The mechanism that carries this faith is the WAAAGH, a gestalt psychic field generated by all Orks simply through existing, which grows proportionally stronger as Orks congregate, fight, and win. The field does things. It shapes physical reality in documented ways. Ork technology, cobbled together from scavenged metal, poorly understood engineering, and what the Adeptus Mechanicus has classified as sheer optimistic audacity, functions with lethal effectiveness in Ork hands and catastrophically fails in non-Ork hands. The Mechanicus has studied this. Their hypothesis is that the WAAAGH field has a telekinetic or quantum probabilistic effect on technology, making it behave as its operators believe it will. Red Ork vehicles go faster, not because of aerodynamics, because billions of Orks across centuries have believed they do, and in the WAAAGH field, belief isn't merely psychological. The official imperial classification of an Ork WAAAGH military campaign, produced with full institutional seriousness in codex supplements, is a cross between a holy crusade and a pub brawl with a bit of genocide thrown in for good measure. That phrasing isn't editorial irony. It's structurally accurate. Fighting is worship for Orks. Every battle is an offering to Gork and Mork, Every victory generates more WAAAGH energy, which draws more Orks, which generates more energy. A closed, self-amplifying sacred loop that compounds until it has the quality of gravity. When a WAAAGH achieves sufficient critical mass, the signal it broadcasts is perceptible across star systems to any Orkoid creature with the sensitivity to hear it. Warbosses who are running their own independent raids drop what they are doing and travel toward the signal. One biological fact compounds everything that follows. Orks reproduce through spores, a documented feature of Orkoid physiology, dispersed constantly throughout each Ork's life and released in a final mass discharge at death. Those spores grow underground into organisms that eventually produce more Orks. Any world where Orks have fought and bled is, from that point forward, a world whose soil grows new Orks. A world consecrated through Ork deaths produces pilgrims from the ground upward, indefinitely, until you apply exterminatus to the entire planet. Every battlefield where Orks have died is sacred ground in the most literal biological sense. The bodies of the faithful become the next generation of faithful. Armageddon has been consecrated many times over, more than the Imperium knows, which is where this argument actually begins. Not with Ghazghkull, not with Yarrick, but with what the planet was before either of them existed. The lore established in the beheading suggests something that, if accurate, transforms the entire strategic picture. Armageddon is Ulanor. During the Great Crusade in the late 30th millennium, the Emperor of Mankind personally led the largest military campaign in Imperial history against an Ork overlord named WAAAGH. WAAAGH commanded the greatest Ork empire ever assembled, centered on a world called Ulanor Prime in the Segmentum Solar, spanning a territory that represented the apex of Ork expansion at that moment in history. The Emperor came himself. Horus Lupercal stood at his side. They crushed it entirely. Every Ork horde, every fortification, every trace of WAAAGH's empire was annihilated. On the field of Ulanor, with the greatest Ork power ever constructed broken beneath their feet, the Emperor elevated Horus to War Master and returned to Terra. He never set foot on a battlefield again. If there is a place burned into Ork collective memory as the site of their most catastrophic defeat, where the most powerful being their race had ever encountered demonstrated the full measure of what annihilation looks like, Ulanor Prime is that place. The spores of the Orks who fell there fed into the soil. The psychic resonance of that defeat, of billions of Ork deaths on a single world, concentrated in a single campaign, wouldn't simply dissipate. Millennia later, during the War of the Beast, Ulanor served as the capital of another vast Ork empire. The Mechanicum was believed to have destroyed the planet. The beheading's account records otherwise. They teleported it. They moved the entire world physically into the Armageddon system and buried the history so completely that the Greater Imperium has never known what they were standing on. This remains speculative in the sense that the Imperium treats it as a classified footnote, but the lore source is explicit. The planet where 3 of the largest wars in Imperial history have been fought, the planet Ghazghkull keeps returning to, may be the same ground where the Emperor stood victorious over the greatest Ork empire in history. The pilgrimage may be as old as the Great Crusade. The Orks may have been coming back to Ulanor since before the Imperium was old enough to notice. The Imperium does not know this. The information that might have reframed 3 wars sits in the same classified archives that nobody reads, because the first war of Armageddon was officially erased before anyone could connect the pieces. What the Imperium knows about the first war is very little, and that is by design. In the late 41st millennium, Chaos cultists dedicated to Khorne rose in rebellion during a warp storm. A space hulk called the Devourer of Stars materialized over Armageddon, and aboard it was Angron, Daemon Primarch of the World Eaters, favored champion of Khorne, seeking to reunify his shattered legion in the material realm. Codex Chaos Space Marines notes explicitly that this represented the culmination of years of preparation. Whatever drew Angron to Armageddon specifically, this was a chosen destination. The demonic legions pushed the defenders back in an orgy of bloodshed. Space wolves responded and bolstered the planetary defenses. Grey Knights teleported into the heart of the demonic horde. Angron was eventually banished. The cultists were destroyed. The planet held. Then the Inquisition arrived. The entire surviving population of Armageddon was rounded up, sterilized, and sentenced to permanent labor camps. A fresh population was imported to replace them. Imperial Guard troops who had fought alongside Grey Knights, who had witnessed demonic manifestation firsthand, were hunted across multiple star systems. The Inquisition pursued and purged the worlds those survivors fled to. Logan Grimnar, the Great Wolf of the Space Wolves, managed to extract approximately 19 ships of civilian survivors before the cordon closed around them. For this, the Inquisition came after him, pursuing the Space Wolves across the sector in what became known as the Months of Shame, a brief and intensely bitter armed confrontation between two branches of the Imperium's own military. Grimnar has never forgiven it. All records of the First War were deleted from Imperial archives, not classified, not restricted, erased, such that a century later, when Ghazghkull arrived at the same planet, the officers defending Armageddon had no institutional framework for understanding why a demon Primarch, with years of deliberate preparation, had chosen this specific world. The Inquisition's reasoning was sound within its own institutional logic. Grey Knight operational details are genuinely dangerous. Chaos corruption spreads through witnesses. Suppression was deemed necessary, and it was executed with characteristic thoroughness. But that thoroughness had a cost nobody calculated. By eliminating every witness, destroying every record, and making the First War impossible to study, the Inquisition guaranteed that no one in the Imperium could ever ask the one question that mattered. Why Armageddon? Why had a daemon Primarch with years of preparation chosen this specific world? And did that choice have any relationship to what would draw Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka? Pulled by a divine vision, guided by the psychic resonance of something vast and ancient, to the same coordinates 2.5 centuries later. The inquiry that might have saved trillions of lives was executed before anyone knew it was needed. The first hymn was sung, the entire choir was shot. 9 years before the Second War, on the Ork world of Urk, a bolter round destroyed approximately 30% of a young Ork's skull and pulped a significant portion of his brain. Mad Doc Grotznik found him. Grotznik, notorious pain boy, whose surgical methods were considered extreme even by Ork standards, and whose most famous procedure involved embedding remotely detonated explosive devices in his patients' skulls. Grotznik rebuilt the Ork's skull with adamantium. The Ork apparently died on the operating table. Grotznik, apparently satisfied with this outcome, dumped the body behind his operating shed. A nameless Grot, one of Grotznik's servants, scavenging through the refuse pile as Grots do, found the body and began examining it for anything worth taking. The eye opened. One remaining eye, in a skull half reconstructed from metal, focused on the Grot and shared with it a vision. Not a hallucination, a vision. Of a unified Ork race sweeping across the galaxy, in numbers that darken the stars between worlds. The Great Green made physically manifest across 1,000 planets. The Ork sat up, declared himself prophet of the gods, and named the Grot Makari. From that moment, Makari would be his banner bearer. His name was Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka. Within 6 years, he had unified every warband on Urk through a campaign of challenges, duels, and what can only be described as theological argument, telling Orks who had spent their entire lives fighting pointless internal conflicts that the gods wanted something more from them, something larger, and that he was the instrument of that want. He built what he called the Council of Clan Bosses, 6 war bosses, each from a different Ork clan, brought under his sway. Then the timing that runs through his entire career reasserted itself. Urk's sun had begun to die. Solar flares were killing Orks by the thousands, and a space hulk appeared in orbit. Ghazghkull stood on the balcony of a captured Imperial fortress he had renamed De Fortress, stripped off his armor in front of his assembled followers, and told them this was Gork's sign. He stood unmoving for 1 week, demonstrating to an army that finds patience literally physically painful, that a little waiting was possible. And once they had built enough rockets to evacuate everyone, he led them aboard the Hulk. The Hulk was full of demons and a warp rift at its center. Ghazghkull fought through to the rift, bellowed a challenge at whatever waited on the other side, defeated a bloodthirster in personal combat, and headbutted the rift closed. The Hulk was renamed Worldkiller. They entered the warp. Per Makari, the Grot who was present for everything and who knew Ghazghkull more intimately than any other creature, the Hulk found its way to the Armageddon system because Ghazghkull had been drawn there due to its apparent holy significance to the greenskin race. The prophet didn't navigate. He was pulled. His canonical self-declaration, found inscribed on the wreckage of a destroyed warlord titan on Piscina 4, reads, "I'm de hand of Gork and Mork. They sent me to rouse up de boys, to crush and kill, 'cause de boys forgot what they're here for. I was one of the boys, till de gods smashed me into Ed, and I remembered dat Orks is meant to conquer and make slaves of everything they don't kill. I'm warlord Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka, and I speak with de word of de gods. We is gonna stomp de universe flat and kill anything that fights back." This isn't the rhetoric of a commander with territorial ambitions. It's a prophet's account of his own commissioning, delivered at the biological moment of death and resurrection, received from gods whose existence is documented in the warp, and addressed at a galaxy-wide audience of Orks who recognize the claims of divine appointment when they encounter them. The 7th edition WAAAGH Ghazghkull Codex Supplement. No other Ork warlord in the modern era has received a dedicated codex supplement, describes him with precision. More than a mere warlord, he is the self-proclaimed prophet of the Ork gods themselves. He is the great green embodiment of all the brutal strength of Gork. Billions of greenskins marched to war in his name. Whole tribes of warriors came to Armageddon from every major Ork enclave in the galaxy during his campaigns. Not just Ghazghkull's followers, but Orks from distant enclaves with no prior affiliation, drawn by the theological significance of what was being proclaimed. What separates Ghazghkull from every other Ork warlord isn't raw strength. Other Orks can match him there. It's the prophetic logic he applies to setbacks. A general who faces a stalled campaign reassesses tactics. During the Third War, a Lehman Russ battle tank shell punched through Ghazghkull's chest in the middle of a protracted engagement. Makari crawled inside the tank and murdered the crew. Ghazghkull, with a hole in his chest, acknowledged to Makari that he had been wrong. Not militarily wrong, but wrong about what the gods wanted him to do at this moment, and announced a change of direction. The tank round was a divine communication. The stalemate was a theological prompt. He left Armageddon to pursue a larger mandate. Prophets don't fail. They receive course corrections. The novel Ghazghkull Thraka, Prophet of the WAAAGH, written by Nate Crowley and published by Black Library in January 2021, examines this from an angle the Imperium would recognize and still fail to understand. The book is structured around Lord Inquisitor Titanita Falks of the Ordo Xenos, who has acquired custody of Makari, the Grot banner-bearer, present witness to everything Ghazghkull has done, and is interrogating him aboard her vessel, the Severissimus Exactor. Falks is over 130 years old, brilliant, experienced, and in possession of every investigative tool the Imperium produces. She is asking the wrong questions in the wrong framework. The novel describes Ghazghkull at one point raging at his gods, demanding to know why they haven't spoken to him after all he has done for them, all the worlds conquered, all the wars fought at their instruction. Even the prophet experiences a crisis of faith. Even the divine mandate requires maintenance. He was, by his own account, shouting into the warp, furious that his employers hadn't communicated. That is still theology. The doubt is addressed to someone he believes is listening. Whether his visions are genuine warp communications or psychic phenomena triggered by adamantium skull reconstruction is a question the lore has consistently refused to settle. The ambiguity is there and it's deliberate, but it doesn't change the conclusion. He acts as if divinely commissioned. His followers respond accordingly, and the results are empirically indistinguishable from a prophet executing a holy war at divine instruction. The Second War of Armageddon began on the Feast of the Emperor's Ascension, 941 M41. The timing, as always, was precisely theological. Ghazghkull's space hulk destroyed the Armageddon system's orbital defense network on approach. Obsolete satellites, small attack craft, no match for a space hulk's weapons. Desperate astropathic messages went out. 3 Space Marine chapters began organizing, but couldn't arrive before the Orks landed. A month after the Hulk appeared, the boarding began. The Imperial planetary overlord was Hermann von Straub. Titan Legion Princeps Prime Curtis Mannheim of the Legio Metallica would later describe him as the greatest waste of flesh and bone born in the last 500 years. Von Straub refused outside reinforcement. He insisted on personal command of a defense he had no capacity to conduct. When Commissar Sebastian Yarrick sent an astropathic call for help without authorization, von Straub had him exiled to Hades Hive. He intended it as punishment. He achieved something considerably more consequential. Yarrick had been born on Taos III under the name Sebastian Varden. His homeworld was invaded by Orks when he was 7. His parents died. He survived for months alone in a countryside occupied by greenskins, hiding, laying traps, hunting Gretchen, foraging, applying every tactic his grandfather, an Imperial Guard veteran sergeant, had drilled into him since he could walk. When an Imperial relief flotilla finally arrived and a patrol found a 10-year-old boy who had outlasted a greenskin occupation through patient, methodical violence, they took him in. He adopted his grandfather's name. The Schola Progenium educated him. He learned the Ork language from a human prisoner who had spent years in greenskin captivity. He became one of the Imperium's foremost living experts on Ork psychology. He was scheduled to retire the day the Orks landed in 941. Instead, he went to Hades Hive. What followed was 6 months of a siege that shouldn't have held. Hades Hive was systematically dismantled around its garrison. The Orks took section after section of the outer city, collapsed infrastructure, cut supply lines, and poured assault after assault through every breach they opened. Yarrick held the garrison together through a presence that defied rational accounting. On the walls when the walls needed reinforcing, in the streets when the streets were collapsing, in the command center when the command structure needed someone willing to make decisions that didn't prioritize personal comfort or political survival. The defense was so vicious, so consistently effective against Ork tactics that should have overwhelmed it, that Ghazghkull eventually treated Hades Hive as a personal matter. He redirected forces from other planetary objectives. He committed himself to the assault directly. Then, warboss Ugelhard, one of Ghazghkull's most prominent subcommanders, closed on Yarrick's position and engaged him in single combat. Ugelhard was large, even by Ork standards, built around a power claw designed for an arm far longer and heavier than any human limb. He drove through the combat and used that claw to sever Yarrick's right arm at the elbow. The arm fell. The Ork warboss lowered his guard, certain the old Hume was finished. Yarrick swung his remaining arm. His sword took Ugelhard's head. The Ork warboss died looking the wrong way. Yarrick bent down and picked up the power claw. He brandished it. He didn't fall. He didn't stagger. He stood in front of 2 armies, his own garrison and the Ork assault force, with one severed arm and his opponent's weapon in the other hand, and let both sides see what had just happened. The account preserves one specific detail about the aftermath. Yarrick didn't allow himself to pass out until after the assault was routed. The news moved through Ork camps immediately, with the velocity that remarkable things always move among Orks. The old man had taken apart a warboss while the warboss was killing him and claimed the weapon as his own. Stories developed within days. The stories converged on one point. Old Baal had an evil eye. Looking at it could kill you. The Baal eye that kills with a glance. Yarrick heard the stories. He subsequently lost his left eye in combat. The exact account varies between sources, but the outcome is fixed. His response was to install a bionic laser implant, the Baal eye, a precision weapon aimed by rangefinder, calibrated as a las pistol equivalent at close range. He had heard that the Orks believed he could kill with a glance. He installed a weapon that made that literally true. The Baal eye's entry in the Lexicanum, sourcing Codex Imperial Guard, records that within Ork camps, the rumor held that Yarrick could kill with a glance, and the Baal eye is where that rumor came from. He then resumed fighting, carrying an Ork warboss's arm where his own used to be, and a glance-killing laser where his left eye used to be, and the Orks fled wherever he appeared. One clarification the lore requires, because the misconception is widespread. The power claw on Yarrick's arm came from Ugelhard, not from Ghazghkull. This is commonly misremembered. The arm isn't a trophy of his great adversary. It's the weapon of a subordinate warboss that Yarrick killed in single combat while that warboss was in the process of killing him. The Adeptus Mechanicus subsequently blessed it to cleanse its xeno-taint. The Adeptus Ministorum sanctified it. Imperial religious institutions formally consecrated an Ork weapon for continued use as an Imperial officer's primary limb. From the Imperial side, the weapon had been cleansed, blessed, and reclassified as an instrument of the Emperor's will. From the Ork side, the distinction between blessed and unblessed means nothing at all. They see the arm. They recognize it. The Second War ended in Imperial victory. Blood Angel's forces arrived with reinforcements as Ghazghkull withdrew on his own terms, and von Straub was arrested for crimes against the Imperium. Yarrick was named Hero of Hades Hive. The Imperium rebuilt. 3 monitoring stations were placed in the outer Armageddon system and named after 3 great heroes of the war: Mannheim, Dante, and Yarrick. The Yarrick Monitoring Station, a beacon transmitting from a fixed point in the void above his planet, broadcasting the Ork saint's name into the empty space between star systems. The Imperium thought they were honoring a man. They were installing a shrine marker. After the Second War, Yarrick pursued Ghazghkull across the galaxy. The hunt lasted nearly a decade, ending at Golgotha, a world Ghazghkull had taken from Imperial-aligned squats and prepared as a killing ground. Yarrick walked into it. His force was annihilated. He was captured, stripped of the Baal eye and the power claw, and woke up suspended in chains above a pit inside the Space Hulk. Ghazghkull watching from above as Yarrick regained consciousness, and then dropped him down a waste chute into the refuse level. What happened during the weeks that followed matters more than the battle that preceded it. Yarrick killed the squigs scavenging through the refuse. He used their large, rigid quills as improvised rungs, fashioned them into a makeshift ladder, and climbed back up the waste chute. The process took several days. When he reached the top, Ghazghkull was there, waiting, with the patience he always demonstrates when he knows the outcome in advance. Rather than execute him, Ghazghkull had Yarrick thrown in with the human slave prisoners aboard the vessel. Yarrick organized the slaves. He had the work gangs, who moved throughout the ship as labor details, covertly map the vessel's layout during their shifts. He identified a large structure shaped like an Ork head that he believed to be a temple to the Ork gods. He built a revolt. He timed the explosion of an ammunition dump as a diversion, then moved toward the bridge with a shrinking group of prisoners, each of whom sacrificed themselves to give him a few more meters of progress. Through the Ork crew members who came to stop them, He reached the bridge, dispatched the mechs manning it, activated every system on the Hulk simultaneously, and watched massive structural damage tear through one side of the vessel. He expected to die in what followed. He woke up in a room with everything returned. The Bale Eye was back in his socket. The Power Claw was back on the stump of his arm. He walked out into a corridor of Orks who were cheering, parting to form a pathway to the nearest launch bay. Ghazghkull stood at the bay entrance beside a fueled, intact shuttlecraft. The Ork warlord stepped aside. He told Yarrick it had been a good fight. He told him to go back to Armageddon and get ready. He later explained his decision to his own underlings, who found it deeply confusing, telling them a good enemy was hard to find. Walk through that sequence carefully. The prisoner's weapons were taken. They were restored and returned while he slept. He was escorted through hundreds of Orks to a prepared shuttlecraft. He was verbally released and given explicit instructions. Armageddon, prepare. His weapons were returned. His destination was specified. His departure was arranged. This is a ceremony. There is no military logic anywhere in it. A prophet was ensuring the opposition for his next holy war was properly equipped, properly motivated, and properly located. Ghazghkull needed Yarrick on Armageddon when the WAAAGH arrived, so he performed the ritual that would put him there. The Imperium, meanwhile, spent 50 years preparing for whatever might come next. Genocidal sweeps of the equatorial jungle from 949 M41 to 978 M41 that never fully cleared it. You can't shoot spores out of soil. Rebuilt hive cities, still showing damage 50 years later. Expanded the naval facility at St. John's Dock to accommodate every class of Imperial warship. Established a military council to coordinate planetary defense. Seeded gravitic minefields throughout the system. Named 3 space stations after 3 war heroes, placed them in orbit, and broadcast their existence into the void. Every decision was sensible. Every decision contributed to the architecture of a sacred site. Exactly 57 years to the day after the Second War began, the Feast of the Emperor's Ascension, 998 M41, Augur psychic probes registered a massive disruption in the warp. The advanced elements of the fleet included 50 Ork cruisers and over 300 escort vessels, accompanied by at least 4 space hulks. Admiral Parole, commanding from the Apocalypse-class battleship His Will, put his 7 cruiser squadrons and available escorts into action within 24 hours. His forces engaged the lead Ork elements in an ambush around the high-gravity world of Pellucidar and destroyed 60 Ork attack ships in the opening exchanges without losing a single Imperial vessel. Then the weight came through. Heavy kill cruisers and masses of fighter bombers swept in from the main fleet. The Triumph, the second Apocalypse-class battleship, was hit simultaneously by the combined fire of 5 Ork kill cruisers and mass teleport boarding attacks. It was crippled. Monitor stations Yarrick and Mannheim reported 3 additional entire Ork fleets entering the system at the same moment. Parole ordered a general retreat to preserve the fleet for what was now clearly going to be a campaign, not an ambush. By the time the full picture assembled, the Ork fleet in the Armageddon system numbered in excess of 2,000 ships and at least 12 space hulks, the highest number of space hulks ever recorded attacking a single world in Imperial history. Ground forces that landed, a minimum of 4 million Ork combatants, per Lexicanum estimates, not counting war machines, gargants, rocks, or the feral Ork tribes already present in the equatorial jungle from the Second War. The Imperial response that assembled in opposition required portions of over 25 Space Marine chapters, an unprecedented commitment, multiple Titan legions, Cadian shock troops, Death Corps of Krieg, Catachan jungle fighters, Elysian drop troops, Mordian Iron Guard, and dozens of other regiments, Sisters of Battle, Death Watch kill teams, Adeptus Arbites precincts. The total Imperial Guard commitment to the Armageddon subsector at the war's start was approximately 1.5 million guardsmen, deployed before the fighting even reached full intensity. Beyond Ghazghkull's own forces, the Ork commanders who came to Armageddon include figures that require attention. The great despot of Dregruk arrived with an estimated 200 warbands and 18 gargants deployed to Armageddon Prime. Urgok the Unstoppable brought his forces to the Fire Wastes. The Overfiend of Octarius, commanding an Ork empire that occupied the Octarius system, entirely distinct from Ghazghkull's territory, arrived with an estimated 250 warbands and 160 battle fortresses for the Deadlands. These aren't followers. These are independent major warlords who came to Armageddon and placed themselves in coordination with a WAAAGH they didn't start at a planet that isn't in their immediate sphere. Orks don't subordinate themselves to other Orks voluntarily. They follow the biggest psychic signal in their environment. Whatever Armageddon was broadcasting in 998 M41, through the resonance of every Ork who had ever bled there, through the WAAAGH energy concentrated in a site touched by the Emperor and WAAAGH and Angron and Ghazghkull and Yarrick and 57 years of anticipation, it was powerful enough to pull independent warlords from their own territories across light years to fight at someone else's holy site. That isn't a military phenomenon. A detail about the Ork landings deserves direct attention. When Ork forces came down in the Fire Wastes and the Deadlands, regions classified as uninhabitable, militarily irrelevant, and undefended, their arrival revealed hidden submersible shipyards already in position. Infrastructure, built and buried in the most obscure corners of the planet, waiting for a return that the Orks had apparently been planning long before the war officially began. Someone had been there between wars. Someone had placed operational assets in locations nobody would look and left them to wait. The Orks had been preparing Armageddon's infrastructure for the next pilgrimage before the last pilgrimage had fully concluded. In Hive Hellsreach during the Third War, Black Templar's chaplain Grimaldus and a depleted force of Astartes were assigned to defend the Temple of the Emperor Ascendant, a structure that had stood since Armageddon's original colonization, sacred to the Imperium as an architectural expression of imperial faith. The Orks assaulted it directly. They didn't need it for tactical reasons. Grimaldus declared over the Vox, in language that left no ambiguity about how he understood his situation, "I have dug my grave in this place, and I will either triumph or I will die." He survived. The temple held. Both sides treated a building as worth dying for. The Orks attacked a temple. The Astartes used the language of martyrdom to defend it. Neither side paused to notice that they were simultaneously treating the same ground as holy. That is the nature of a cathedral. The faithful inside and the pilgrims outside don't have to agree on why the site matters. Both still show up. Ghazghkull didn't lose and retreat when the stalemate deepened. A Lehman Russ round punched through his chest. He took it as a divine communication and showed Makari the holy war he had made on Armageddon, acknowledging it could be greater. He departed voluntarily aboard the Space Hulk Perversion of Pain, charged by his gods to assemble a galaxy-wide WAAAGH, the campaign his theology calls Ragnarok, and left his subordinates to continue the engagement on Armageddon while he pursued the larger divine mandate. The outcome of the Third War: a marginal Imperial victory, though neither the Imperial nor Ork forces were able to secure complete control over the contested world, and fighting is still ongoing. The Codex, Orks, notes plainly that the Orks came to regard Armageddon as a kind of Valhalla, a place they can always come to find a good fight. The fighting there is now called Ragnarok in Ork communities. Not a battle, an ongoing, sacred event. Sebastian Yarrick started as an unmarked man, a commissar in a black greatcoat, scheduled to retire, holding together a defense nobody believed would hold. By the time the Third War ended, here is the physical inventory. His right arm from the elbow down, the power claw of warboss Ghazghkull, taken in 941 M41, blessed by both the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Adeptus Ministorum, physically built for a creature substantially larger than any human officer. The claw is scaled for an Ork warboss's arm. The hydraulics, the grip width, the weight distribution are all wrong for a human frame, are all designed around a body that Yarrick's musculature can't replicate. Certain community analysis notes that the claw should, by rights, cause him to list permanently to one side. It doesn't. He has been carrying it for over a century. His left eye, the Bale Eye, a bionic laser weapon installed deliberately to weaponize Ork superstition, aimed by rangefinder, calibrated to fire at las pistol equivalent range, designed to make a myth literally true. The rest of him? Augmetics accumulated across more than a century of warfare, and what later lore accounts describe as what appears to be an exoskeleton beneath his greatcoat, holding the entire structure upright. He is, physically, more Ork artifact than he is original Commissar. His primary weapon is Ork. His left eye is a device that exists because Orks said a specific thing about his eyes. His body has been reconstructed around what the Orks needed him to be, one surgical modification at a time, and the Imperium's own religious institutions blessed each modification and called it imperial. In the Era Indomitus, a report from the Divisio Mortis of the Officio Praefectus circulated through imperial war zones and forwarded to Terra. Sebastian Yarrick was dead. No details of cause were provided. The bell of lost souls in the imperial palace rang for him. The death paperwork was filed. The Imperium accepted this information. Then Yarrick came back to Armageddon. His first recorded act on his return, the planetary governor was issuing evacuation orders over the global Vox network as new massive Ork forces were detected inbound. A bolter round terminated the transmission. The governor's body was moved aside from the Vox console. The voice that replaced him declared, "There will be no evacuation. There will be no cowardice. There will be no defeat. This is our city. This is our world. Soldiers of Armageddon, make ready." Every Ork in the sector noted, old Bale was still there. Yarrick understands what he is to the Orks, at minimum, partially. He is documented, in official lore, as one of the very few imperial figures who understands Ork mentality and superstition well enough to modify his own body to deliberately exploit their fears. He installed the Bale Eye because he knew exactly what it would do to Ork psychology. He is the foremost imperial expert on Ork culture. He learned their language before either of the major wars. He has spent over a century studying them in the most immediate way possible, by fighting them and paying attention to what frightened them and what they told each other about him afterward. Whether he knows the full scope of what he is, whether he understands himself as an Ork religious icon, is something the lore hasn't confirmed. He installed the Bale Eye. He kept the Power Claw. He understands what the Orks think he is. But knowing and having an imperial framework within which to act on that knowledge are entirely different things. There is no category in imperial theology for canonized by an alien religion. The cathedral does not require the permission of its windows to be holy. Walk back through what the Imperium assembled, decision by decision, and the irony compounds at every step. After the First War, in the late 41st millennium, all records erased, all witnesses eliminated or silenced. The Inquisition protected a secret and destroyed the institutional capacity to understand why Armageddon kept mattering to beings capable of sensing things across cosmic distances. No inquiry was possible. Every potential inquirer was dead or suppressed before they could become one. The misdiagnosis was made permanent before the diagnosis was needed. Before the Second War, nobody had the framework. Ghazghkull was unknown. The Orks were a new threat from a new direction. The Imperium had no surviving institutional memory of the First War. They aren't stupid. They are operating in the dark that the Inquisition built. Hermann von Straub, through spectacular incompetence, positioned his most capable officer at the most critical point in the war. Yarrick took an Ork arm, installed an Ork superstition exploiting laser. The Adeptus Mechanicus blessed the arm. The Adeptus Ministorum sanctified it. The Imperium named a monitoring station after him and placed it in orbit above his planet, broadcasting his name into the void. Every decision was individually rational. The aggregate architecture is a pilgrimage site. Between the Second and Third Wars, 50 years of rational military preparation that further elevated the stakes, rebuilt everything destroyed, expanded naval infrastructure, fortified the orbital approaches, established a military council, continued xenocidal sweeps that couldn't clear the jungle because you can't shoot spores, and so the jungle kept producing orcs for 2 more decades as the Imperium fought them. Meanwhile, Armageddon's manufacturing output kept running, 10 million battle tanks per year per the Emperor's gift, making the planet ever more worth fighting over from every military angle, which made it ever more significant as a pilgrimage destination from every theological one. The Third War's Imperial Response. Over 25 Space Marine chapters, multiple Titan legions, the full commitment of the largest military institution in human history. From a pilgrimage standpoint, that response is itself theological testimony. It proves to every Ork watching that Armageddon is worth the Emperor's total attention. The more magnificent the defense, the more magnificent the devotion required to fight through it. The harder the Imperium resists, the more sacred the ground becomes beneath them. Every hero's name remembered makes the battlefield more storied. Every last stand makes the site more worth dying at. The Imperium isn't wrong to defend Armageddon. It's a strategic necessity, a hive world in the segmentum solar, the industrial heart of the sector, critical to Imperial survival. Abandoning it isn't an option, but defending it exactly as they are defending it, through heroic last stands that generate Ork legend, through fortifications that prove the planet is worth extraordinary sacrifice, through deployments that signal to every Ork in the galaxy that this is the most contested ground in the Imperium. That defense is itself the source of the catastrophe. Every correct military response is a theological error. They aren't stupid, they just don't have the framework. Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka is, by current lore, heading back. His forces have been moving through the sector, taking planet after planet in a pattern that points toward Armageddon. Yarrick returned first. The bell of lost souls rang. The death documentation was filed. And then old WAAAGH came back to his hive world and executed a governor on a live planetary Vox broadcast and told the soldiers of Armageddon there would be no retreat. In the equatorial jungle, feral Orks descended from the Second War's 941 M41 invasion still fight. Spore-born warriors, 3 or 4 generations removed from the combatants who originally landed, fighting on because the ground they occupy keeps producing them. Angron's monolith, a structure left behind from the First War, has resisted every attempt at destruction across nearly 6 centuries and appears connected to the warp in ways no Imperial institution has publicly confirmed. An artifact of unknown origin in a southern jungle region drives anyone who approaches it to madness. 3 separate factions are currently fighting on the ash wastes simultaneously. The planet has never been completely any one thing. It has always been this: contested, layered, bleeding, consecrated. The Ork Codex records a saying with the neutrality of institutional documentation. Orks are never beaten in battle. We can always come back for a new vergo. This isn't bravado, it's theology. The fight at Armageddon does not end, because it isn't supposed to end. The pilgrimage site is always open. Old WAAAGH is still there. Behind walls the Imperium has reinforced 3 times, surrounded by military force that proves the site is worth coming for. Carrying an Ork arm blessed by Imperial priests, his glance killing at rangefinder distance, exactly as the stories said it would. Every war the Imperium fights there makes the walls taller, and the hymn louder, and the signal stronger, and the destination more worth the journey. The WAAAGH burns red somewhere in the void above Armageddon. The Orks see it from light years away. They have known that name since Hades Hive in 941 M41. They will know it until the last Ork in the galaxy stops believing that old WAAAGH can die. He hasn't died yet. Armageddon can't be defended because it isn't a military target. It's a cathedral, and every war the Imperium fights there is another hymn. Subscribe for more stories like this.